Good morning. Welcome everyone to the Haynes webinar series. Today we will be covering what you need to know about HVAC logistics and supply in 2022 and beyond, why being proactive may not be proactive enough. Thank you all for being here. My name is Matt Koenig. I'm the Director of Sales here at Haynes Mechanical Systems, and I'll be the moderator this morning. To my right, I have Danny Sprague, who is the New Business Development and Project Lead here at Haynes. Danny, would you be so kind as to give us a brief intro on your time in the industry, time at Haynes, and kind of education, how you came up?
Sure. So I have been with Haynes for 13 years now, I believe, working mainly in projects. Before that, I was doing consulting engineering for another decade, so over almost 25 years in industry. Local guy, went to school of mines, got my degree in mechanical engineering.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for being here. To my left, I have Gavin Chapman, sales engineer at Trane. Gavin is with us this morning to provide the perspective from a supplier. Gavin, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Gavin Chapman with the Trane company. I've been with Trane for, believe it or not, 20 years now. It surprises me. I am a mechanical engineer by degree, but have been working at Trane as a sales engineer now for my entire career. And I do sales and engineering support for different clients, including Haynes.
Great. Well, thank you, Gavin. Thanks for being here. So the format today, we'll walk through a few slides. It's going to be a very conversational webinar. We will direct some questions to Danny and Gavin and have them provide some answers as to what's happening out there in the world of supply chain as it's specifically related to HVAC and in our industry here. We have opened up the chat, so if you have questions, please feel free to enter in your questions in the chat box, which I'm opening up the unmute now. So you should be able to do that now. And at the end of our webinar this morning, we will save some time and cover some of those questions. If for whatever reason we can't answer those this morning, we will surely get back to you with answers related to that. And we are currently working on unmuting the chat function right now, so bear with us. But I won't let that slow us down. So let's begin. I think an appropriate place to begin is what was it like before all this? So Danny, I might put this to you. Pre-pandemic, pre-supply chain issue, the typical life cycle of a project, from trying to get quotes put together, get equipment from the manufacturer to the piece of equipment actually arriving, on site.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So I'd even go back maybe a little bit further in the process. 2 or 3 years ago, we'd be working with a customer. We'd be putting together some sort of a capital budget for them, a capital budget plan, which could be a single year, 5 years, 10 years, depending on the situation. We would start our budget process sometime, usually in the second, third quarter, sometimes as late as the fourth quarter. We'd be looking for authorization in that in the first or second quarter of the following year. We'd start our engineering process at that time, and we would solicit quotes for different pieces of equipment, working through the process to the point where we got comfortable with it. Then we'd order equipment, and then we'd have a construction period, and we'd have our closeout. The whole process, at least from the authorization to the closeout, usually would take somewhere in the time frame of maybe 3 to 4 months for a bigger piece of equipment. Could be longer for a more complex job, but that would be our typical life cycle. Obviously, things have changed since then.
Things have changed since then. Not to say that we weren't without challenges at that point, right? We've been experiencing a skilled trades shortage for several years now, so it's not like it was, easy at that point, but things have certainly gotten worse since some of these issues have come to light.
Sure. I think we read these labor shortage articles, and I think it's something that we have been experiencing in the trades for way before any of this. So yeah, I mean, I think at Haynes, we've done a pretty good job of trying to stay out in front of that. I mean, that was what led to the creation of Haynes University and trying to grow our own technician base. But yeah, I'd say construction wide, we've been dealing with our own particular issues for a long time now.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, so moving into what's happening out there, it seems like it's a perfect storm, right? There's a lot of issues affecting the supply chain and getting equipment from the manufacturer to the building and installed. And a lot of that has to do with just the sheer number of points within the supply chain, right? I mean, if a rooftop shows up at a building, it originated from almost raw material, right? It takes that raw material to be put into the manufacturing line, developed into components and parts, and then shipped on a truck or a boat to get to the end user. And there's just a lot of pinch points, right? So I guess Danny and Gavin, maybe I'll let both of you guys kind of chime in on that. What are some of those pinch points?
But I think I'm not going to shock anyone with this, but there are a ton of points. And when you think about what that supply chain really truly looks like, I mean, you could go to mining ore. Actually, you could even go before that. I mean, there's equipment that is needed in order to even mine ore, which is then turned into some sort of a raw product, which then has to be turned into some sort of component, which then has to be assembled in a factory, which then has to be put in use in a building. So, and at each one of those points, you've got to have it's shipped in some form or fashion from one to the other. And on top of that, you've got a labor component that goes into there as well. You've got crane operators, you've got forklift drivers, you've got all of these different factors that play into it, and we're all experiencing our own issues throughout this whole pandemic.
Yeah, and Train, we at our factories we do build the equipment from just material. A lot of the equipment from just the material. However, there is a big portion of the equipment that is all sourced, and whether it is motor pieces, wiring harnesses, copper fittings, copper pipe, there's a lot of components that go into the equipment that we don't make from a raw material. And so we are relying on that getting to our factories in time for the equipment to get produced.
And so I guess if you look at the process, there's potentially multiple points of a possible failure of getting a piece of equipment out, right? We can have everything put together except for one small copper fitting from one particular manufacturer that is used by multiple manufacturers out there in the marketplace, and that has held us up. I mean, speaking from personal experience here at Haynes, we had it 90% ready to go, and we were waiting on what, Gavin and Danny? Was one copper fitting?
It was just a copper fitting and some wiring harnesses that were not being brought to the factory in time. And so factories are operating in just-in-time manufacturing, and when something doesn't show up when they say it's supposed to show up, everything comes to a screeching halt. And unfortunately, Haynes, you guys did experience that with a recent project where we were supposed to ship in November, and we didn't end up shipping until January. And the equipment was basically 99% done, sitting there, and everything just waiting on some parts and pieces.
So extended, and I guess Danny, I'll echo your point. Is everybody on the call likely knows this from ordering things from Amazon for their homes, or ordering furniture. Everything is extended here. I think what we're trying to detail here this morning is if we can relate it back to specifically for HVAC, and then ultimately have the goal be by the end of our webinar provide some strategies and some actionable steps to take for our listeners out there that are asset managers, property managers, facility managers, procurement folks. Just how can they look at this maybe in a different light, and we'll get through this a little bit here moving forward. But you know, all accounts point to this isn't going away within the next, I don't know, 8 to 9 months, and potentially, you know, extended much farther than that, right? So we talked about some of those supply chain points. Let's talk about chip shortages, right? I don't know if anybody on the call has tried to purchase an automobile, you know, over the past 2 years. It's increasingly difficult to do that. You know, may or may not know, a lot of HVAC equipment contains those same chips, right? And so I guess, Gavin, to you, you know, if a customer is looking to purchase a rooftop unit or an air-cooled chiller, or, you know, any piece, what pieces of equipment contain those chips that could be a kind of a stopgap here?
Everything. I mean, everything's got chips in it now, and it's not to say that all chips are in a shortage, but all it takes is for one chip in the shortage to screech everything to a halt. You know, everything's got to be running full cylinders for things to be producing the way they're supposed to be made, or at least we're used to them being made. And I'll give a little story here. We recently have had to announce that very long extended lead times on our air-cooled chiller product, and most of our air-cooled chiller product uses a EC motor condenser fan. And if you know anything about EC motors, what does an EC motor have in it? Well, it's got a very specific chip in it that works with that EC motor. And right now, the manufacturer from overseas that ships those to us, and actually ships to most every other chiller manufacturer in the United States, can only produce and send 18 of those fans to the United States a day. That's enough for one chiller for all manufacturers a day to be able to make. You can just imagine what that's doing to our lead times and what we can project, what we can produce. So as of right now, that is going on right now, and you know, we're hopeful that it will get better, but we're not given any guarantees or promises.
So air-cooled chillers, 18 fans a day for the entire
country.
The entire country. Okay.
Yeah.
And air-cooled chillers aside, I mean, a lot of other pieces of equipment use DC fan motors. Is that across, Danny, I guess, you know, from your experience across the board, talking in the critical, mission critical space, from crack units and other pieces of equipment that might utilize that same technology, does all of it kind of funnel through that?
Yeah, actually, it really does. EC motors have really been pushed to the fore as energy codes have gotten stricter. So as we're trying to improve energy efficiency in every piece of equipment, you know, this is fan walls, it's cracks, it's everything that you can think that moves air, uses, for the most part, is now using an EC motor. And so that if they're all manufactured by one company, and we're experiencing that across the board.
Can you buy equipment without an EC motor?
Yeah, you can, but it's increasingly less common, right? Because of these energy codes. So yes, you can still get equipment without EC motors, but it's like I said, it's less common and many times not allowed.
For code purposes.
For code purposes, yeah.
Okay. So either way, it's worth really digging into understanding what the lead times are, one way or the other, or even just the availability in your local and your municipal codes around them. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and the biggest thing too is it's constantly changing. So it could get worse, it could get better. It's a day by day at this point.
Sure. And one thing we know about codes, and that they're not going to lax codes anytime soon. They're going to continue. I mean, we have those codes are targeted out sometimes decades in advance. So we're going to see stricter codes, and we're going to see, you know, the need for more of this stuff as we go forward. So there will be a time where no motors will be manufactured that are into standard induction motors, would be my guess, or at least not for the most part on most of the equipment we're talking about here.
Okay, so we have, you know, the chip shortages, in certain specific pieces of equipment that are one single point, one manufacturer that's serving, you know, many different types of equipment and other manufacturers. You know, we're hopefully in the tail end here of the pandemic, but we're still in the pandemic, and that's had a great effect. Gavin, I think you and I were talking the other day about trains, COVID protocols, and this is all public knowledge out there. Could you talk about just the manufacturing plants here, within the U.S. and abroad, and really what that I guess what were those protocols? What happened within those manufacturing plants, and what effect did that have?
Sure. Well, when the pandemic began in 2020, it was also new for everybody, and everyone lived the same thing worldwide. Train had to jump on that very quickly, and essentially we shut our factories down in the beginning, and then slowly ramped them up to allow for physical distancing between workers. But our equipment is not made by robots. Our equipment is made by people, and many times those factories, it's in close quarters, people working. And when we had to move people away from each other, it really reduced the amount of production we could put through those factories, even when we were getting supply, right? So there was a labor issue. And Train took a very strong COVID protocol stance because Train is a large company. And at one point, I was told that we were losing one employee a day at one point to COVID. And so Train, being so large, that's a big deal. And they did not take it lightly. And we still have very strict COVID protocols in our factories, even though we've been able to kind of get back into full labor capacities. But there is the demand really didn't slow down too much during that time. So we're still dealing with that.
Sure. I mean, one outbreak away, I guess, from shut down certain areas of a manufacturing.
I sure hope not.
Plant.
Yeah.
And then, you mentioned that your equipment isn't made by robots; it's made by people. The COVID response aside, we hear these, the term "the Great Resignation." People are changing and changing careers and doing different things. How has that affected manufacturing and equipment coming out?
I guess we'll see. I don't really quite know yet how that has all played out, but I do know that I can speak to our Pueblo factory, which is our factory here in Colorado that makes all of our air-cooled chiller and screw water-cooled chiller products. It's in Pueblo, and the skilled labor in that area is very difficult to come by, and getting the right people in place in the factory has been a struggle. And I hear that from our product leaders in Pueblo, and it still is. They're working hard to get people to Pueblo to be able to work in the factory, but it hasn't been easy. And exacerbated by the pandemic too, it's been even more difficult.
And again, I think hopefully for our group here that's on the call, I mean, our intent today is to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and just give some context to why this is happening. I mean, I think everybody knows that this is everything is extended, but it's nice. So thanks for sharing some of those anecdotes from Train and what was happening out there with the COVID piece. I was not aware that it was that level that you were losing one person a day to COVID. That's pretty amazing. Raw material shortages. So I guess Danny, could you kind of cover that piece of it here? What's happening with raw material?
Yeah, there are shortages for several of these, and that's really where a lot of the chip shortage came from, is a raw material shortage to produce those semiconductors. So those heavy metals are tough to come by, and we have such a demand in today's world for that we're just not able to mine fast enough to keep up, which is a big part of it. I mean, Gavin had mentioned about there's pretty much a chip in every component in a mechanical piece of equipment. It wasn't that way 50 years ago. I mean, it was very, very mechanical. I mean, that's why it's mechanical equipment. But now, I mean, it could easily be called electronic equipment.
Thanks, Danny. And then there's some current developments just with the geopolitical climate out there. We're hearing, information from the Fed about interest rates rising. We all know inflation is here and it's happening, and there's certain monetary, policies that are out there. I guess, Danny, how is that impacting what we're all experiencing out there?
Sure. So from a geopolitical standpoint, I mean, we've got differing viewpoints from political parties. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone on this webinar to hear that there's differing viewpoints on a lot of that. And so we've been kind of shifted around in different directions. Certain foreign countries are taking certain stances on things, both from whether it's a climate aspect or, trade or any of those factors that play into things. And then from a pandemic response, the federal government basically flooded the country with capital. And so what we're seeing is just a huge amount that has been pumped in, which has helped to keep demand high because there's money out there, there's capital out there to spend. So yeah, that is causing a lot of consequences.
You have factories that were, shut down for a brief period of time that are trying to ramp back up. You have the people component, not enough folks, sitting in those seats to build it, and then this huge influx, this huge stimulus through, in K through 12, through the American Recovery Act, and these ESSER funds, and some of these other vehicles of pumping money back into the economy, which has created this huge demand. And it seems like manufacturers it's struggling to keep up.
Yeah, and increased costs of raw materials and labor costs have really pushed price increases to a level I've never seen before in my career with Trane. And I would typically see in a year, in the 20 years I've been with Trane, in a year we would have one, maybe two price increases with a point or two on our equipment. In some years, maybe it was three points on the equipment and the price increase. In the last year, we've seen 3 price increases with double-digit percentage points of price increase. And this is real cost coming to the Trane factory, and it's across the board with all manufacturers we're seeing. And so it's been unprecedented with inflation that we've seen costs go up.
Yeah, and it's not just the material cost that's going up. It's also the shipping cost. We had a conversation about that as well, but the shipping costs are astronomical compared to where they were at pre-pandemic levels, and it's causing shortages from shipping containers all the way to every possible thing that you can imagine right now in the supply chain.
Yeah, to put that in some context, I think the Wall Street Journal reported that pre-pandemic, pre-supply chain issues, to ship a shipping container from Shanghai to the port of Los Angeles, it was roughly, I think, $2,000 per container, and the latest estimates are it's upwards of $25,000 per container, which is just an astronomical hike in pricing. And so that's certainly been a factor. And Trane is not alone in that. We've seen pricing increases from all of our vendor partners and manufacturers that we work with, and I mean double-digit increases 3 times in a year it's a huge impact on what that ultimate project cost is going to look like. And I guess because it's happening with an increased frequency, I guess, Gavin, what are you giving as far as when quotes come out from Trane, how long are those quotes good for?
Yeah, nothing's changed in our standard proposal. We've always been 30 days, but how we've enforced that, it's changed completely. So now it's enforced. And when we send out a proposal, it's 30 days. And sometimes I'm nervous about the 30 days.
Sure. Thanks for being candid. I mean,
Yeah.
I know it's a pressure point for all manufacturers, but
yeah. So, we can only price with what we know now. And all I can say is that expect the unexpected. And in my entire career, I've never seen prices go down in the industry. Sure. So they only seem to creep up, and they're going up faster than I've ever seen before.
Yeah. So safe to say, you've been with Trane for 20 years, and this is unprecedented.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and from our perspective, to pull the curtain back a little bit, from the Haynes side of things, When Gavin gets a quote to me for a piece of equipment on replacement after a customer has asked for a quote, or we've gotten to the point where we need to do that, I mean, it's not the next day that we can turn that piece of that quote around to a customer either, right? So I've usually got subcontractors that are going to be involved. And I had one subcontractor tell me, a sheet metal subcontractor tell me that his quote was good for 7 days, and that was it. So imagine what it's like when you're trying to put together a quote with 20 or 30 different quotes to give to a customer, that by the time they get that quote, I mean, they may only have a 7-day window in order to pull the trigger on something like that before my pricing is now expired.
Yeah. And the difficulty of getting, quotes approved internally at some of our, our customers out there, we understand the struggle on that end too. Sometimes it takes, weeks to try and get final approval, and multiple people making, weighing in on a decision like that, from a building owner or an asset manager or whoever it might be that's making those ultimate decisions. And the time that, that takes, it's you go back and we're kind of handcuffed by the 30-day or in some cases 7-day, hold on what those quotes are to Haynes. It really, creates a potential for a big catastrophe of not having accurate, pricing, and having to go back and say, hey, the pricing's changed. Right?
Sure. I mean, on our first slide, we talked a little bit about what life was like before. I mean, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, before this had all happened, if a customer were to call and request a price on, let's say, a rooftop unit or something like that, I mean, that process went pretty quickly. You would expect to have a proposal within about 2 weeks. It's just not the case anymore. There are more factors that have to be considered as part of us even quoting. So now not only are we looking at equipment from the standpoint of how well does it work, what's the efficiency, what's the reliability, what's the cost, but now it's what is the availability as well. So, and how good are prices for, how stable are prices. So there's a lot of other factors that kind of go in now that we didn't have to consider just a few years ago, things that we wouldn't have even thought to consider a few years ago.
Yeah. Because I mean, before, and I guess still now, we want to provide, maybe multiple options that showcase, better efficiency, or, less maintenance involved throughout the life cycle of the equipment, whatever that is. And now, I mean, even maybe more important than those items are, how quickly can we get it? And is it going to fit the current setup within your building? And I mean, that's got to be probably one of the most important factors at this point, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I'll chime in on that too. There are decisions that now me as a sales engineer have to make and relay to my customers about certain options that are going to push the product into very extended lead time. To give an example, on I'll use the air-cooled chiller option again. We could have an air-cooled chiller, standard air-cooled chiller, and lead time would be, I hate to say it, but about 30 weeks. And that's crazy to me. And we've never been that long for a 30-week lead time for an air-cooled chiller. Typically at most, 11, 12 weeks or something like that. And now we're at 30 weeks. Well, we want to add on a free cooling, say for like a data center application, that just pushes that lead time to 52 weeks. If you place an order on a chiller like that, it's going to take, what we're telling you right now is 1 year to get that chiller. So what can we do differently than put on an integrated free cooler? And that's what the conversation I'll have.
Yeah.
Because we have to get creative sometimes with what we have out there.
And I relate this back to, when people tell me how many weeks they're old their child is in their, or months, I guess, 24 months, whatever, just say 2 years. So if we can relate that back, I mean, we're talking 30 weeks, we're talking 52 weeks, we're talking 6 months to a year, right?
Correct.
Yeah. If we were to get a PO for a cooling project, for example, on January 1st, and we were somehow able to pull the trigger and get a PO to Gavin and release that into production the same day, we wouldn't have that until the end of June, to put that in perspective. So if you're thinking about a cooling project, you need to be thinking about a cooling project either a year in advance, potentially, or at the very least, as it comes fall and we're rolling, most people are thinking about heat, we need to start thinking about next cooling season.
Yeah, so it's February now, right? Trying to get a replacement piece of equipment by this cooling season out the window?
I mean, not necessarily. I think it depends on the project, but I think that's where the conversation has to be had both with, our customer, Haynes customer, end user, and also with, suppliers like Gavin and say, hey, what can we do? Because there are some options. I mean, there's sometimes we can look at maybe a field installed option that would have been a factory option before, which could potentially cut some lead time down. We've talked a little bit about that with, some of the controls components as well. So I think that there are things that can be done, but it just depends on the situation, how critical that, piece of equipment is in that timeline.
Yeah. Thanks. So, a couple strategies out there. If you're fortunate enough to be able to have a capital plan that's been developed, 1, 3, 5-year capital plan, that's great. And we can plan for some of that stuff. Another strategy out there is fix on fail, and some folks are that's what the strategy is, and that's one way or the other. What is the impact, I guess, if I could take it to on the fix on fail side, something does fail today and you can't get components to get it up and running. What is the impact on rental equipment out there?
Sure. So we always look in these projects, we look at risk mitigation, right? So as soon as the trigger is pulled, as soon as a decision has been made to move forward with a replacement or a project, every day after that represents risk of spending capital that didn't need to be spent. So ideally, the day you pull the trigger is the day something goes in and there's almost zero risk for having to deal with increased costs. The risk mitigation strategy for the longest time was, well, there's a plentiful rental market out there. So if something did happen between now and then, we could just go get a piece of rental equipment. It would cost more, but at the same time, we'd at least be able to keep a building comfortable or a situation in a good spot. Now we're, because of these extended lead times and because we've seen some of these, failures occur during that surplus is getting depleted. And so we have to start looking at new risk mitigation strategies. So, I mean, we're literally one natural disaster away from depleting the rental market almost completely. And we've seen that before the pandemic. Just imagine now having that, even worse. So now it may be, do we need to look at having a crash kit? Even if we know we're replacing a piece of equipment, do we buy components for it just in case those fail? And we need to look at what those components, what the lead times are on those individual components. What's the risk of those individual components failing? So the whole thought process has shifted when it comes to risk mitigation.
So what advice would you give for the people on the call here on the webinar to maybe analyze their facility for a crash kit? And for those of you that, for those that don't know, what is a crash kit?
So crash kit would be a set of components that we might pull together that would have a higher likelihood of failure. So on a crack unit, you might have a supply fan, you might have a compressor, things like that, right? On a rooftop unit, you might have a condenser fan motor. Well, especially now, you might have a condenser fan motor be part of that. Compressors, just components that are high likelihood of failure. Actuators. Great,
thanks. And I guess to provide the audience with some usable information too, Gavin, from Train, I guess, what would be considered, like what items are in stock right now? And I'm not going to hold you to this right now, but what's in stock, what's not? I mean, I know you don't mainly deal with on the parts side of it, but compressors and that sort of thing, is all of that still readily available, or does it depend on the type? And
I would only say sometimes. It just depends. You could get lucky,
sure.
and you could get very unlucky too. So they're doing their best to keep everything in stock, but it's not as readily available as it used to be. And as far as equipment goes, I can speak for Train, and Train has a stocking program for light commercial unitary package units. And what is available is a total crapshoot. And so, if you have a 10-ton unit with a 460 volt requirement, and I can look up inventory and tell you we don't have any, or, you got lucky, there's one in Arizona, let's see if we can grab that for you. But it's not that we have 10 in stock locally of every size and every voltage like we used to.
Sure.
And when it comes to replacing a piece of equipment that's failed with a stock piece of equipment, it's not very often your best choice. It really takes, from an engineering perspective, it takes our ability to make that building better away from us. So we're dealing with what's available instead of what's best for a building. And sometimes that, and in all cases, you put a piece of equipment on like that, you've made that decision for the next 15 to 20 years. So there are lasting impacts to that, especially if you have to put on maybe a bigger piece of equipment because we can't get the one that is, your size, for example. The energy costs could, add up to the cost of that equipment over time. So there are lasting consequences for some of these decisions that are being made.
So, safe to say, if, you're someone on the call and you're looking at, analyzing, pulling the trigger on a project like that, better to ask a ton of questions about that, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think that the more time that we have to work as a team, and when I say team, I mean customer, us as a provider, and then with our vendors as well, the longer we have to work through that, the better result we're going to get always. But at this time, we're just feeling pressures from so many different angles on that time frame. So where we used to be able to take our time, figure things out, now we're condensing a lot of that stuff. So it's just that it's a high pressure situation that involves a lot of communication.
I think communication will be a kind of a fundamental theme here throughout our conversation here this morning of just making sure that we're way over communicating to make sure that we're getting the best results here.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And then just to close out this section here, the term out there of just-in-time manufacturing and then just-in-case, strategy here from the customer side. I guess, Gavin, could you speak to the just-in-time, and Danny to the just-in-case and what those mean?
Sure. Just-in-time manufacturing is a lean way of manufacturing. And it is still a very competitive market, and Trane is not moving away from just-in-time manufacturing. We can't do that and be competitive. So nothing's changing there. And because of that, it's, we have lead time fluctuations because of the supply chain issues. Just in case, I don't know, Danny, you want to speak to just in case, but that's not something I can speak to.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's also causing some of the spike in this whole supply chain issue, is because now, to put it in an example, I think we'll all understand that when you look at the toilet paper situation, is there actually a shortage, or was it? When there was somewhat of a little bit of a shortage, everyone goes in and used to buy toilet paper. Oh, we got a couple of rolls left, and let's go buy some toilet paper. Now there's 20 on the shelf. You're buying 20 packs of it, and it's making the shortage that much worse. So I've heard some customers are buying, on small, more residential style stuff, but they'll buy warehouses of equipment, and they're kind of hoarding that because they understand, kind of what's coming down. But that's making the whole thing a little bit worse.
Yeah, especially smaller compressors for unitary equipment,
Right.
Something like that.
Exactly.
Interesting. So, guys, is this the new normal? Is this what life is going to be like? And, best guess here, how long is it going to be like this?
Well, I don't think the demand is going away. We have an insatiable demand right now. There's a ton of money out there. We have interest rates that are rising. We've got the supply chain. And so a lot of people are pulling the trigger on equipment just as quickly as they can, which is causing an additional spike, which is then causing additional lead times. And so, I don't know. Are we there? Are we at the bottom yet? I don't think so. I think that things will probably continue to get a little bit worse before they get better. And I would imagine that the recovery is going to take a long time to really free up that backlog.
Yeah, I don't think we're near the end of the storm. I think we're in the middle of the storm on this, quite honestly. I wish I could have a crystal ball and tell you exactly when it was going to be better. But right now it's hunkering down and figuring out the best way to sail through it.
When you think about it too, a project like pulling the trigger on a project this year versus pulling the trigger on a project next year could cost you 20%. And for $1 million project, which in the commercial world is not, that's kind of a standard project, you're looking at a $200,000 price increase. So yeah, people are wanting to get stuff in right now and capture as low of costs as they can, which then is also going to lead to some of this, extended lead times and some of these projects not getting done in time as well.
And we mentioned, Gabby, you mentioned the pricing increases as interest rates rise, as inflation continues to rise here. I guess along with just the extended lead times, can we expect continued pricing increases?
I would say that is probably absolutely, you can expect that. I mean, we've had price increases every year that I've been working for the company. But what level of price increases will we continue to see? I don't know. I can't answer that. There's some magical ways that they calculate all those, and it really is. It comes down to labor costs and material costs. As long as those continue to rise, our costs are going to continue to rise.
Sure.
I think if you're looking for any guidance on something like that, just look at what the Fed's doing with their interest rates and their monetary policy, and we're projected to see probably 3 interest rate increases throughout this year. So I would say that the people in the know are thinking that this inflation is going to carry for quite a long time.
So you are a facility manager, you're an asset manager. What can we do here to prepare for this, to plan for this? What strategies can we start to be thinking about right now, to maybe talk to others within our organization to let them know what's happening? I get a sense that in some of our customers' organizations, you have people that are boots on the ground that actually are very aware of this stuff, that are seeing it firsthand because they're trying to do some of the ordering and trying to see some of this stuff. What advice would you give to them on how to present maybe some of this information to somebody that's a little bit higher up that might not know the full impact of what's happening here, given that some people do have money left over at the end of the year and they want to try and get projects done within that same year?
Yeah, I think, like we talked about, the theme of this, communicate. Understanding where you're at and in your chain, I guess, the hierarchy, and communicating both directions on what your intentions are. Communicating with your vendors and letting them know, or your partners, what's going on, what your plans are, and how we fit into that, and then also letting your executives know as well what situations we're facing. We've run into a lot of times where an executive is making a global business decision that will affect individual silos within that business, but they don't communicate necessarily to them, or they communicate in a way that is for them standard operating procedure, which might be 3 or 4 months out. Hey, this is the plan. Make sure you have everything in place for that. That's just no longer a viable option for us. Sure. So communicating early and often, I think, is the number one thing that you can do.
Yeah. And we've talked about the lead times of the equipment. How about just like getting quotes from manufacturers? And no offense, Gavin, I mean, you guys are not immune to what's happening too, from just the people perspective. But what extension have we seen from even just the ability to get quotes? So let's say a technician is out on site performing a preventative maintenance inspection. They find the bearings going out on a piece of equipment. We identify that. We bring it to our the manufacturer of that piece of equipment. We're looking for a quote. How much has that changed over the last 24 months?
Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. I would ask our customers to be a little bit patient with us, because we're having to be patient with our vendors, because there's so many other factors that are now really coming into play. We spoke about that, like the availability is now it's a big thing. Even to having a technician on site. I mean, many of our customers now are requiring vaccinated technicians. So even getting a technician to respond to a service call is taking longer, because we've got a certain pool that are in that and a certain pool that's not. And so, from the very beginning, to the very end, everything is taking longer. Like I had mentioned before, I think 2 weeks was a little bit of the expected norm for an equipment replacement before. Maybe next day for a part would be a quote expectation. I mean, I would say now sometimes it could take 6 weeks just to bring a quote together. And unfortunately, that quote may be only good for 7 days. So now a customer is really having to be pinched on their process as well.
Thanks for saying that, Danny. So in the event, there might be folks out there that are, looking down the potential of, they have they know that they have equipment that is needing to be replaced. In the event that they have a failure, a component failure in that piece of equipment, and probably the right thing to do would be to evaluate replacement of that equipment. What are we seeing right now as far as that option to replace it versus potentially repairing it and then still having to, or I guess looking at the replacement, but still having to repair it before the replacement even happens?
Yeah, that's our repairing to replace kind of theme, is that you may have to spend more on a component, a repair, while still planning for replacement, because the replacement is kind of the right move. And when you think about it too, like we had mentioned, it's the devil you know or the devil you don't in some cases, because we don't know what the situation is going to be like when you would be looking at replacing it. So I think trying to get that running both of those concurrently is our best risk mitigation standpoint right now. I mean, it's unfortunate. You don't want to be putting money into a piece of equipment that ultimately needs to be replaced, but you also don't want to be trying to replace that piece of equipment with what's in stock either necessarily, because it could be a 20-year 6-figure mistake versus a $10,000 compressor mistake.
Yeah, and a light unitary equipment, which is typically the majority of this type of what you're talking about, I would imagine, used to be a 3-week, 4-week made to order lead time on that equipment. Now that equipment's pushing 14 to 16 weeks, right? So what you might have been able to get away with in 3 to 4 weeks for a piece of equipment to arrive, made to order exactly for what you need, is now tripled, quadrupled, and so that's put triple, quadruple the time of being down or having a piece of equipment limp along and babying it for that long, or getting rental for even that much longer. Sure. So definitely nothing you can ignore right now.
Well, it's also, we have the need to be more flexible as well in some of the design process. So really is going to change design going forward, I think, in a couple of ways. One, right now, today, we need to be more flexible. So Gavin and I had that conversation about backnet cards being, not available, but maybe lawn cards are available. So having a building automation system that can be versatile and use either one of those, I think, is important. I would also say, as we look at more and more customers having very defined maintenance windows, thinking about schools, critical facilities, that they're targeting their maintenance in a very specific time. And so we have to take that into account, and you may be planning that at one maintenance interval, we might be planning for the next one just, a year later. Or we might be looking at designing a complete system differently to provide additional redundancy. Instead of it being 50% redundant or N+1, we might be looking at N+2, N+3 in order to really mitigate this from a long-term perspective. So I think that there will be some permanent design shift that will come out of this.
Not just mission critical in schools, but potentially even commercial office buildings.
Correct. I mean, an office building isn't going to operate if you don't have cooling in it, so it may not be a hospital necessarily where lives are at stake, but there are, 6-7 figures on the line for an owner every time you have an extended failure.
Yeah. So again, to bring it back, any other strategies that we can think of for the group here to be thinking about that as far as, expediting that decision-making process?
Yeah, I think understanding your own decision-making process within your organization as a customer, and then communicating that and trying to bring those projects as shovel-ready as possible. So when I say that, we don't want to spend weeks after something has been, a PO has been cut. We don't want to spend weeks doing the design. We may have to now look at potentially doing a lot of the design work up front, and maybe a smaller, purchase order or something like that. And then having that project ready to go so that the decision can be made quickly and that we're confident that we can hold pricing for the time frame it takes. Also, I would say communicate what that process is, to us, so that if we need to build in some price escalation or we need to do something else, we're willing to help with that. We just need to know what that looks like in a realistic manner.
Sure. Thanks for that. That's great. And I know we have talked about some creative things, and I guess this is from the slide before, but Gavin, we talked about the automation component being a part of the actual mechanical systems. What are some creative ways out there that you've seen of people trying to finagle a way to get a piece of equipment on site, even if maybe that circuit board within the automation piece of the rooftop unit might not be available?
Sure, and this topic is very fresh. It was just announced to us that we have a shortage on our rooftop backnet cards. So pretty much any product that we make that has a microprocessor controls and then has the ability to communicate to an automation system using backnet, we're looking at third quarter, maybe even fourth quarter until we can get those. So we are trying to stay as nimble as we can to figure out what we can do to continue with existing orders that are out there that have been placed with these cards on, and new orders coming in. And decisions are being made. Can it wait? And if it can wait, great, we'll just leave it there. But if it can't wait, can we make a change? And we can remove that backnet card, and then the equipment can continue to be produced, and the lead time that we said when the order was placed, and doing a field install. So get the equipment, you can start it up and find a way to get it to run without communication until we can get the card in third, fourth quarter of this year.
So getting the equipment on site without the building automation integration component that's associated with that piece of equipment, and then trying to figure out a way to get that installed potentially at a later date if it can't wait.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's getting creative.
It's getting creative. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are costs associated with all of that. Any of those decisions have a cost implication. If you're going to set a rooftop unit on there and run it standalone when it was designed to be integrated to a building automation system, you're going to spend more money on energy in the interim. There's someone is going to have to bear the cost for that technician to go out and field install something, which is going to take 3 times longer than it would have in a factory as well. So I think you have to be prepared for some of that. I mean, having contingency in budgets, even in process, even projects that are in process now, having contingency built in for some of these unexpected items, I think is an important strategy.
Sure. So over communicate, make sure that everybody within the organization understands what's happening out there in our marketplace right now. I would say even if possible, increase the transparency between organizations here and say, here's what the need is, here's the time frame that we're trying to hit, and then have us have Haynes as the partner try and be as transparent as well and say this is, if we're looking at some different options here from efficiency, from longevity, whatever it is, these are the options. And then part 2 to that equation is, here's how soon we can get it, and that will likely influence the decisions from how people want to pull the trigger. Stay ahead of the curve. We don't see it going away. We've kind of seen some projections here of potentially third, fourth quarter of 2022. Do we put a lot of stock in that? I think it's just way too hard to tell at this point, right? I mean, this could be with us for the long term. And then if we are, looking at anybody out there that's looking at possible, new builds or design builds within current space, maybe kind of rethinking some of those design perspectives and design strategies, given what we know about, the next, 2 to 5 years of how this looks, right?
Yeah. Some people that I'm talking to, and who knows? I mean, some people are thinking that it could start easing in third, fourth quarter of this year. Some people think up to mid next year. Some people that I'm talking to are saying this could be a decade or more. So I think it really is going to have to shift your thought processes for the long term. And then it's going to require some compromise and just a lot of thinking, thoughtful planning on how we're going to approach all of these in the short term.
Sure. Thanks. Any parting words here from the group, Gavin and Danny, on any other insights or any information you might want to give out here to the group before we cut out here?
Check in with me often, or any of your vendors often on lead times. If you get a quote and I tell you it's 10 weeks, if I tell you it's 15 weeks, don't assume it's just going to stay there. When you're doing your planning, call me, shoot me an email, and I'll update you on lead times as they change, because they have been changing rapidly.
So if a Haynes representative has a quote out there, it is quite possible that those times are changing on a daily basis at this point, potentially.
Yeah, our factories report on a weekly basis.
Okay.
So, a week goes by, it could change. So,
okay.
I think I would say, for kind of parting thoughts here, that at no point, at least in my career, has partnership meant more than it means right now. I think communicating in the partnership and transparency on all sides, is the only thing that we can really do truly proactive to help us get through the short term and even into the long term. So
great. Well, thank you, Gavin. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for sharing some of your insight here into the process and pulling that curtain back a little bit, so our customers on the line here can understand the context behind why some of the stuff is taking a lot longer than it typically does. Danny, thank you for being here too. Thanks for sharing your insight and your experience over the years. I want to thank everybody that attended the call today. I apologize, we weren't able to get the chat function working. If you have questions, hopefully you made a note of that. And if you'd like, you can email info@Haynes Mechanical Systems with any questions that you might have, and we can have a representative get back with you to address and hopefully answer any of those questions that might be out there. We are going to continue our webinar series throughout 2022, so be on the lookout for emails going out and invitations for that. But again, thanks for everyone for attending, and thanks Gavin and thanks Danny for being on the call. Thank you to everyone that attended. Look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.